If you listen to the government or the media, you would possibly think that the decriminalisation of prostitution in 2003 in New Zealand was fantastic for women and fantastic for New Zealand. It's time to think again.
Good evening, welcome to Late Edition. The world's oldest profession is now legal in New Zealand, but the move to decriminalise prostitution squeezed in by only one vote, and it was passed after a handful of MPs changed their minds.
Will 61 of us vote to remove the last significant vestige of Victorian moral law from the New Zealand statute book? Yes, Mr. Speaker, I believe we will.
The ayes are 60, the noes are 59, abstention 1. The bill will be read a third time. Unlock the door. Unlock the door!
It doesn't get any closer, but all it takes is one vote more than your opponents to change the rules.
We've just released an in-depth review of the effects of the prostitution law change. Is it working? An evidence-based review of the decriminalisation of prostitution in New Zealand has been written by Kiwi researcher Tony Pitt and Helen from Stand Against Sexual Exploitation, which is based in the UK. The detailed analysis has been based on government data and multiple Official Information Act requests over many years, and it challenges the assumption and the prevailing narrative that the law reform has been a raging success. In fact, it reveals a huge gap between the reputation of the law and its actual impact.
New Zealand decriminalised prostitution in 2003 and is the world's best example of how society and government can humanely accept and manage what is often recognised as the oldest profession.
The report highlights several significant concerns. Increased numbers of prostitutes. It appears that not only has the promised reduction in numbers following the law reform failed to materialise, but there has in fact been a marked increase in the number of people involved in prostitution. The number of street prostitutes in Auckland, for example, has increased tenfold. The New Zealand Prostitutes Collective, which is a government-funded lobby group that advocates for normalising prostitution as ordinary work, has failed to collect accurate data on the numbers of people involved in prostitution, despite being contracted by the government to do so. And overseas prostitutes working illegally have increased numbers considerably. Ironically, one of the champions of the prostitution law admitted 10 years later, "We thought naively that with the liberalisation of prostitution that it would not be desirable necessarily to be a street worker." Health and safety and the reality of violence. These include coercion into unwanted sex acts, high levels of violence, physical injury, unsafe sex, and exploitative practices such as long working hours. Violence is a risk every prostitute takes on a daily basis. Assault, rape, and strangulation are not uncommon. Fueled by increasingly violent pornography and a drinking culture, punters frequently enjoy hurting women. As a result, studies continue to document depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety disorders, dissociative disorders, and a bipolar disorder in women involved in prostitution. Low rates of reporting and prosecuting violations. Street workers experience 2 to 3 times more violence than other workers, and actual serious violence, for example rape, holding against their will, physical violence, are reported less than 20% of the time. Even the Prostitutes Collective reports to the Ministry of Health make frequent mention of violence and coercion, often by brothel managers or pimps. What other business or sector of society in New Zealand would tolerate this? Where's the occupational safety and health? No other work employment sector has a risk factor where rape is considered an inherent part of the work. And why would we want a family member to be in a setting where there is a 35% chance of being sexually assaulted? The black market. The industry realities of gang involvement, child exploitation and internal trafficking are largely denied or ignored by the Prostitutes Collective. New Zealand's black market for prostitution has been well documented by media and noted in multiple US trafficking in persons reports. The Ministry of Children confirmed that underage prostitution was not a target area and that no funding had been made available to tackle it. Lack of support for exiting the industry. no resources have been provided to support women who wish to exit the industry. When the law reform was being debated, it was promoted as helping to prevent entry and facilitate exiting. But the Prostitutes Collective, which receives substantial annual government funding, obviously does not support an exiting approach. The government committee reviewing the law in 2008 stated that 85% of respondents did not want to stay in prostitution. Brothel inspections, mandated but not happening. Despite the fact brothel inspections are required under the law, there have been none carried out in the main centres of prostitution, Auckland, Wellington and Christchurch, during the period of this review of this report. Public health service managers were in fact advised not to be proactive in relation to conducting investigations. And an OIA in 2008, an Official Information Act request, revealed that no funding had been assigned to carrying out inspections. When you read the report, you will shake your head and wonder how could anyone say that the law was a good thing. It seems to only benefit pimps and brothel owners. When implementing this law in 2003, Parliament was clear that its impact should be fully scrutinised. In 2008, just 5 years after the law was passed, that review recommended assessing the new law again in 2018. That never happened. And the government says there are no plans to review the law, despite 28 recommendations being made by the review in 2008, the majority of which were completely ignored. Our report identifies with evidence that the main reason for the misinformation about the impact of decriminalisation is because the conversation is dominated by the Prostitutes Collective, who the government funds, and the government relies on for information regarding any issue related to prostitution. But as the report reveals, the Prostitutes Collective does not provide support for those wishing to exit, has no official contact with the black market of prostitution, and plays down the industry-wide realities of violence and exploitation, denying the existence of underage abuse and internal trafficking, rejecting the voices of exited women, and amplifying the voices of pimps. Many MPs had misgivings about supporting the law reform. They stated that nothing in the proposed Prostitution Reform Act increased the protection of the human rights of any prostitute. This report confirms that their concerns have been fully vindicated. We are being regularly contacted by families around the country who are opposed to brothels opening next door to family homes and within a short distance of sensitive sites such as schools, playgrounds and play centres. In fact, when introducing the law which gave control of the placement of brothels to local councils, a bit of a hospital pass actually, the then Minister of Justice, the Honourable Phil Goff, said, "Most of us would not want to see brothels established in residential areas or adjacent to preschools or schools." Wishful thinking. Accounts of home brothels, or otherwise known as soubs, where men willing to pay for sex are visiting nearby homes trying to find the brothel, and concerns about noise, traffic, intimidation and late night visits are common experiences from having a brothel in a residential area or next to a school. Brothels are a business which have no place in residential areas. Unfortunately, this whole thing has been a spectacular failure and families are suffering because of it. The report makes a number of recommendations, including a focus on child sexual exploitation and trafficking, funding and resourcing exiting, and prevention, including awareness of the impacts of pornography, and ultimately the recriminalisation of brothels and pimping. Ultimately, we must stop the normalisation of prostitution, which exploits vulnerable people while turning a blind eye to sexual violence. But to conclude, let me leave you with a personal testimony of the harms of prostitution and its victimisation of vulnerable people. In 2015, Jay shared her powerful story at our annual Forum on the Family. Here's a couple of excerpts.
I'd always wanted children and found out I was not pregnant again, and I emphasise again, I so much wanted children. Something just snapped inside of me. I did not care what happened to me anymore and thought, I may as well get paid for having sex. I know that sounds crazy, because it is crazy. But that's exactly what I thought. Without knowing what to charge, I went up the K Road here in Auckland and sat on a seat in a known red light area, and I waited. About 20 minutes later, my first client turned up. He was from Scotland. And I charged him $60. Within days, I was told I should have charged $80. Easy money, I thought. I found it very, very easy to do. Maybe because as a teenager, I traded sex for alcohol with men I knew and didn't know. For the next 14 months, I went up to K Road 3 to 4 nights a week. I was raped, robbed, and scared many times. Each time I did it, I never knew if I was going to be raped again or murdered this time. I usually drank before I started, and sometimes I wouldn't even remember having clients because I was in an alcoholic blackout. But the only reason I discovered I had been prostituting that night, I had money in my pocket and there were condoms missing. For about 3 months, at one stage I did it without any alcohol in me. I realised I was a robot. I had no normal emotions. Everything was mechanical. I was not human. After about 14 months, I tried to stop, but I didn't. I did it off and on for 4.5 more years. I believe my childhood abuse made it very, very easy for me to prostitute, as it was just more abuse on someone who had spent many years already abused. In fact, I can't think of any prostitute that I know that hasn't had past abuse of some kind, especially sexual. Prostitution is just another abuse on people who have already been abused like myself. Prostitution will never stop, totally stop. But if a man knew he was going to be in trouble if caught paying for sex, I believe a demand will lessen a lot. I believe the sex industry destroys people who are already vulnerable. And the worst thing the New Zealand government ever did was make it legal. All it did was make it easier to enter the industry. Prostitution is not normal. It's not. But by making it legal, the government is saying it's an okay job. Why make it easy to do? It's made people who have often already been abused get abused even more, even if it's only emotional. Many sex workers have addiction problems, and often when you want to clean up and the desire is there is no help. I haven't prostituted since 1999. Actually, that's last century, that sounds good. But at the moment, the memories are very, very vivid, as if I had been raped yesterday. 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and presently under a psychiatrist and a therapist to help me deal with that. I was starting to have lots and lots of flashbacks to those days. I believe the sex industry is not an option for women or men, as it destroys. It took me years to come right, and I'm still coming right. And I will get right. Amen.
Read the report. It's on our website, familyfirst.nz. Download the report today, familyfirst.nz.